Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday Forum at St. Luke's Church. We're so happy you're with us. A lot is going on, as you can well imagine, both in the culture at large, but also with the pandemic. And we're going to focus in on the pandemic today because some shifts are afoot, and we want to explore them. For her third visit with us, she has been so generous with us. Dr. Jodie Guest. She is an epidemiologist, a research professor on the faculty, and the vice chair of the Department of Epidemiology at the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory. And she also serves as one of our diocesan bishops' chief advisors on making decisions about diocesan protocols and keeping them aligned with the CDC protocols and the protocols of the whole universe of epidemiologists. So without further ado, Jodie Guest, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the time I get to spend with you.
Well, I love that as well. I just appreciate everything about you and what you're doing, and you're such a public servant. And I just realized that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is with us. And I just want to say, oh, I'm so glad we have a Ruth Bader Ginsburg doll like that with us. It's interesting how what people collect. I love it. So there's several things to talk about, and we're going to kind of go deep into the bishops changing the protocols. But before we do that, I thought that all of us would be very interested in just checking on how you are. What is your life like as an epidemiologist in a pandemic?
It's very different than it was a year ago. So a year ago, I actually just returned home from Alaska with my second trip I've had in the past 12 months. My first was the week before that, where I was in Boston doing a seroprevalence survey for COVID-19. So, my life, like all of the other folks, has been very constrained space-wise. I spend an inordinate amount of time sitting right here in this chair, in this room, on Zoom. And I don't think that that's particularly unique. I think from an epidemiology perspective, the things that have been different for me this year is, well, first of all, people are talking about what we do, and that's really different. And analyzing every statement and mistake and misstatement and questioning a lot of what we've been saying. It has been both heartening and disheartening this year to see differences play out. I think social media has been both our friend and our foe. 24-hour news media has been our friend and our foe. And I think some of the hardest things for me in the past year have been watching people's lack of regard for our connectedness and lack of regard for science, and have been unwavering in their commitment, some folks, to dismantling the conversations we've been having, rather than dismantling all the things that we're asking for, which are all the inequities that we've seen and things like this. So there's a lot of place for passion in the past year, and some of it's been very, very well placed, and some of it's been, in my opinion, not as well placed.
Right.
Yeah.
I have reflected many times on the fact that my mother was a science teacher in public school. And whenever I run into the kind of diminishment of science and the scientific method and people who are scientists and think like scientists, I found my getting my back up a little bit, because I was raised, all of us go through science classes, but I was raised with a mother who taught it and respected it. And the other thing that gets me, Jodie, is religious people who are anti-scientific. And my father was a Baptist minister. My mother was a great church lady, in addition to being a science teacher. And she had it all worked out about how God was in the mix of the science, so.
Yeah.
And I know you are a practicing Episcopalian and you have all that going on. So thank you very much for hanging in there. I know you have no option but to joyfully hang in there, because I've felt how committed you are as a ministry to your science. And I appreciate that so much. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. So I'm on your side. I got your back, George. If anybody messes with you, tell them to come. I want to tangle with me.
I'll be sure to do that.
So, Jodie, big deal this past week. We clergy had a meeting with the bishop, and he said, probably pretty soon, we're going to say that you can gather indoors, and we're going not to think it through in all the details. We're going to leave a lot of it up to you. We'll still have certain boundaries. And then by George, 4 days later, here we were getting something from him. And the backstage of everything going on in the church. All of a sudden, we were having all these intense meetings about, how many people are we going to have outside and inside and da. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the thinking that went on with your advisory group and your relationship with him.
Sure. So, I cannot say enough about the bishop and his willingness to follow the science and the numbers and to make some really hard calls. We have asked him to be a leader in keeping our community safe, and he has stuck with us through all that we've asked of him, and has taken a very hard line of, it is safer for us to be online than it is for us to be together. And we've done some baby steps with outdoor gatherings that started in the fall. And I think those were really important to do, and by far the safest way for us to do them. And there were even times when I thought that those maybe should be moved back online on Zoom. As we were hitting the fall holidays and moving into the winter holidays, we really saw our numbers get extremely out of control. And so he's been very thoughtful in following that. What we also know is that our numbers are currently better than they were in the fall and through the winter months. They are still not as good as they were consistently last summer. And so there's some tension, in what you do with that. But at the same time, we call those who are struggling with COVID-19 long haulers, or that's one of the terms, but we're all long haulers in this pandemic. We've all been struggling, and the mental health issues, the lack of ability to connect. Some people connect better through their computer monitors than others. I've gotten pretty adjusted to it, but others, that's really not fulfilling their needs. And so there's this tension between public health that includes the mental health of all those we're caring for, and wanting to gradually move back to our new version of normal. And so as we do see numbers coming down, and as we do recognize the toll that this year has taken on everyone, and with our increasing vaccination rates, it was the intersection of those three things that really led us to where we are right now, which is some tempered in-person gatherings, still distancing, still masked, still registering in case we need to contact trace, recognizing that this may be a step forward that may not last. That this is a dance that we're doing with this virus, and but a strong hope that this is the beginning of the light at the end of the tunnel. And it seems from a church perspective, that's pretty cool to have right at Easter, right? That's a pretty nice parallel.
It's very cool. Yeah, we're taking it slow. We have as I think many parishes have in the Diocese of Atlanta, have their groups that are meeting, and we have a couple of epidemiologists on our parish team. And one was very, very clear. She says, I don't want us to make a mistake by going too fast.
Yes,
And you can just go too fast on this thing,
absolutely.
even with this new license from the bishop. So we're having 2 outdoor gatherings on Easter, in addition to our online, and it'll be quite festive, etc. And then it's the next Sunday that we'll have our first indoor gathering, but we're only starting with 50 rather than going to the 75. We just want to be able to see that we've got our process down.
I think that that's great. I do think that our wishes and desires to be together do need to be tempered. And I think baby steps are the right way to move forward to make sure it's a manageable system,
Right.
because it's not back to the before times, and it's not going to be for a while.
Right. Yeah. The only thing that, I'm able to live with everything. And the thing I'm struggling with the most is not singing. And I think that's the case with all of us. Do you have any sense of when we'll be able to sing again? I know that's a very kind of a relatively superficial question to ask you, Jodie, but it's really, I mean, that's part of our worship, isn't it?
I know it is. So singing on Zoom is super safe. It's interesting because there are some things we can do safer on Zoom than we can do in person, and singing is still a great way to transmit this virus. And that's the way that is. Until we're vaccinated at a higher rate, that's going to be something that is not going to be eased up on just for protection.
Yeah.
And so, everything's a risk benefit ratio in this decision-making process. And so, if you had 2 people at the opposite ends of a football stadium and they were together singing, that's really different than having 75 people or 50 people indoors. And so which would you rather have?
Yep. Oh yeah. I'm totally with you. And actually, I'm glad that we went there, because you're helping me educate some people who've been particularly disappointed.
Yeah.
They couldn't sing Hail Thee Festival Day or Welcome Happy Morning or something like that on Easter.
Right. Absolutely. I get it. But you can in your home, and you can in your car, and you can when you're outside by yourself or with your family unit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Good deal. So let's talk about the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to integrate into this a question about the variance that we have.
Okay.
Because I understand that the numbers don't, just because they're getting better doesn't necessarily mean that they're guaranteed to continue to get better.
That's right.
And then we have these factors called the variance coming in. And that's, driving me crazy, because just because you're fully vaccinated doesn't mean necessarily that you are protected from a variant. So if you could be a little do some science talk with us right now about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So viruses mutate. This is a known thing. It would be highly unusual if they didn't. In fact, we would wonder what was going on if these viruses didn't mutate. And the more spread there is, the more room we give it to mutate. So as our numbers got so out of control in the late winter, or end of 2020, beginning of 2021, we gave this virus a lot of places to mutate, and it did. And currently, we see some of those mutations becoming the more prevalent mutations that we have in the United States. And 2 of our vaccines that we have, the Pfizer and the Moderna, our first 2 that we had, were not tested in their clinical trials during the time of these mutations being out there. What we also know is in the United States, we weren't testing for a lot of mutations. We were testing very, very small percentages of our COVID-19 samples. And so we really weren't having a handle on what the mutations look like. But a couple other places were doing that. The United Kingdom and South Africa and Brazil have all give us a lot of information about mutations. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the latest one to be given emergency use authorization, actually was tested in the time of variants. And so it is a hard comparison to take the data from that vaccine and compare it directly to the other two, because they were tested at different times in our mutation life cycle. So that's a little bit of background. As far as we're getting vaccinated, we really do believe our vaccines still are quite good with these variants. And so that's the excellent news. We also believe that it's going to take a fair number of mutations for these vaccines to not work well. Although the people working on the development of these vaccines are preparing in case there needs to be a booster for particularly those 2 mRNA vaccines that a bunch of us have already gotten. But because we don't have enough really substantial data yet about how these vaccines protect us with these different mutations, that is part of the reason why we're still asking people to mask up while we continue to increase our numbers of those who are vaccinated. But a couple of things are going to happen as we, if we continue to mask up when we're out in public, and we can talk about the CDC guidance on when we don't need to in a second. We are helping the transmission of both the virus and the mutations of the virus from continuing. And so as our numbers go down and as we protect each other from more spread, we are stamping out more of these mutations. And then in parallel, as more vaccinations go up, we're going to win this race against this virus, or at least get to a place where we're not constantly saying, please separate, please wear your mask, please don't get together with people who aren't inside your bubble or your pod. And that's our goal, is to get to that. So it is, several different tensions are working together, but everything we do to keep the spread down, keeps mutations down, and gets us faster to where we want to go.
And where does the concept herd immunity play into what you've just described?
Yeah, so herd immunity means, in general, it means that when enough people have something, if you're resistant to it or not going to get it again, protected from it, that we get to a place where it can't spread super easily. And in general, it's believed that you need somewhere between 75 to 85% of the folks to have herd immunity to get to a place where the virus is not going to have a lot of places to live. And it's then going to protect all those others who've not gotten to herd immunity. So there are a couple of kinds of herd immunity, though. There's natural infection, and then there's vaccine-oriented herd immunity. What we know is that natural infection herd immunity, which there were a couple of scientists that tried to suggest that this was the right thing to do. And my best corollary to that is back in the day when chickenpox was not something we vaccinated for. It was really common, if you haven't had the chickenpox yet, for your parents to send you to go play with someone who had chickenpox so you could get it really early. That's kind of the idea of this natural oriented herd immunity, because then you got it, you got over it. But that was not something people were dying from. And so herd immunity from natural infection from COVID-19 was kind of horrifying to think about from a science perspective, because that meant we were willing to say a certain percentage of us were going to die for the benefit of the rest of us getting through this. So I don't like that idea. That feels very Hunger Games to me. Like, who's the tribute? Who are the people that we're willing to let die? And we can't pick them. They're just going to happen. And so a bunch of us really pushed hard back against this idea of natural infection herd immunity. But vaccine-oriented herd immunity is exactly what we want to get to. We need to get to a place where more than 75% of us have been vaccinated, and then this virus is not going to have very many places to go. And when its numbers start to diminish, its ability to mutate is also diminished. And that's what we want to have happen.
Yeah. And do you, as a scientist, attach or allow your brain to attach itself to some kind of date about when you're hoping or expecting herd immunity to take place?
I do. And it's both a slightly professional date as well as a very personal one. I am very attached to the date of Thanksgiving 2021. And I'm attached to that because there was some original data. I think it's a conservative date, and I'm thrilled to say that. And I'm going to hold on to a conservative date because then I won't be as disappointed. But the New York Times did a really wonderful trajectory showing if we had been vaccinating at the level that we were about 2 months ago, we would hit 70% on November 28th. And that was assuming we continued at the very slow rate we were going at the beginning. And we've thankfully picked up substantially, both in the number of people being vaccinated daily and the number of doses available to vaccinate folks. And so I think we're going to be ahead of that. But that's kind of where I'm landing so that I protect myself and my patients, to think that we'll be at a place where we'll be gathering. It's also the holiday where I always go home and, to my parents' home, and I didn't get to last year. So it's kind of my hurrah I'm waiting for, to see my family that I haven't seen since Thanksgiving 2019, which is crazy to think about. But I do think we'll get there before then. I think there's a chance we'll get there before school starts in the fall. And that really should be the goal.
Sounds good. You mentioned earlier that it would be good for us to talk about the importance of masking, even for people. Well, what is the role of masking for people who are fully vaccinated?
Right.
When do you mask and when do you not?
So really exciting new guidance from the CDC is, to me, one of the most exciting pieces of guidance we've gotten in the past 12 months, which is if you're fully vaccinated, which means you are 2 weeks after the last dose of your vaccine. So if you've got Pfizer or Moderna, that means 14 days after your second dose. If you got Johnson & Johnson, it's 14 days after your only dose of the vaccine. So that's what we're going to call fully vaccinated. If you are there, then you may gather indoors unmasked with other fully vaccinated folks. Beautiful. That's some normality, coming back. And as we see more and more people being vaccinated on a daily basis, the likelihood that you're going to have some friends that you haven't been gathering with indoors or unmasked, all of a sudden you're going to get to see their full faces again. And that's pretty cool. And so we know that guidance is there, but again, it's fully vaccinated folks with fully vaccinated people indoors. From an outdoor perspective, every time I go out of my house, unless I'm going into another person's house that's fully vaccinated at this point in time, I'm still masking. And that is also part of the guidance. And that is my contribution to helping my community stay safe and making sure I'm not a carrier to help this virus mutate. And I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. And so for the moment, while our numbers are still where they are, both disease numbers and vaccine numbers, that is part of the role that we all play, even as vaccinated people.
Got it. That makes perfect sense to me. So now I want to go back to something you said earlier that I think is really, really important. Before I do that, let me ask you about, do you, Jodie, think that we might have to have annual vaccinations for COVID?
We don't know.
Is that going to be around?
Yeah, we don't know. The chance that there might be a booster is not, I wouldn't be surprised. It might end up being a yearly vaccine that you get at the same time as your flu vaccine. Right. That's kind of worst case scenario. And that's not a terrible scenario. We already do that with the flu. best case scenario, it was a one and done, and you're good for the rest of your life. And somewhere in the middle are this idea of every once in a while you might need to get a booster, and what kind of timing that would be, we don't really know. We are still in that zone of we don't know yet, because our most fully vaccinated people are still only about 6 months into vaccination, 7 months for some of the earliest in clinical trials. So it's really not clear to us what that's going to look like. If the numbers go back up again and mutations become super prevalent and we get more of them, we're going to lead ourselves into needing a booster for sure. If we can keep the mutations down, there is a better chance that we won't need that.
Makes sense. All of that makes sense. So now to the question that you placed into my brain when you said something earlier about this is a public health issue, and public health includes mental health.
Mm-hmm.
You and I've not talked about mental health before, but I'd love for you to talk about mental health.
Sure. Well, I think largely we have a mental health problem in our country pre-pandemic. It's stigmatized and it shouldn't be. We somehow talk about it as being different than other health related issues that we might be willing to share. I have high blood pressure. I need to lose weight. I've got diabetes. All these things are sometimes stigmatized and sometimes not. But mental health carries this huge stigma with it that is really unfortunate, and it makes it something that is harder to get care for. It's harder to share with friends that you get care for. And if there's ever a thing you need support for, it's probably in that category. And what we've seen is this lack of connectedness that we've had the last 12 months, the loss of jobs, the loss of in-person gatherings, the loss of in-person schooling for our children. Our mental health support needs are through the roof. And and particularly with our children, who we like to pretend don't have mental health concerns. And it is really hard for our social children who are learning all of their engagement and social practicing their social techniques with each other and growing as these cool people. They're doing it alone and on Zoom, and and teachers are trying and are doing the best with what they've got, but it is not the same. And so we're really seeing our children's mental health resources maxed and not capable of keeping up with the resources that are needed for our youth in particular. And not to diminish any other age group, but that's an age group we don't talk about a lot. And that's an age group where this pandemic has really, really brought significant need, because we've had them at home to protect them and their teachers and the staff from COVID-19. We've created this other issue that we have got to be able to better support. And so to use the word tension again, it is a tension between protecting and yet knowing you're perhaps causing some risk and in somewhere else. And so, if you think of like a balloon and you push on it on one side and it pops out on the other, that's kind of what has happened with as a consequence of some of the public health prevention that we've required or requested in this country. And some of our children are paying that price.
I want to get to a question about proactivity in just a minute about mental health, but let's talk about responding to symptoms in friends, family, colleagues, and our children. What are best practices, Jodie, when we see some imbalances coming up?
Yeah, I mean, checking in on people. And I think it's important when you check in to lead with, this has been hard. And acknowledging that up front, so that that immediately starts to eliminate some of the barriers and the stigma to talk about it. This is hard. I suffer this way. And when you lead with that, sometimes that makes it easier for others to also share. Even if they're not sharing, you're normalizing. And so that's important. I think listening, to our friends and making sure we know where they are and what they're up to, and how we can, keep track of each other when we don't run into each other the way we did before. But if I have a friend I haven't heard from in a while on text or something, checking in with them and making sure, hey, are you okay? I've missed you. And I think we have to work a little bit harder on our connections during this time of physical distance, because the spontaneity is gone, and the interaction with each other is gone. It also means perhaps texting is not sufficient. Perhaps you do need a Zoom call or a FaceTime, so that you can see each other, as rather than hiding behind, or having the ability to hide behind a text. I'm fine. Well, is fine good enough? Is fine that person's standard answer, or is fine different from what you normally hear from them? And being really sensitive to that.
That's so helpful. And some of these things are proactive as well. Gosh, I really appreciate your saying, just lead with the acknowledgement that this has been tough. And I think clergy need to do that as well, is to model how hard it's been for us, and to give people some license to share that with one another and with us. Are there regimens that you think it's important for us to incorporate in our daily lives that act as kind of proactive mental health disciplines?
Absolutely. Exercise, getting outside of the house. And I am not a model citizen for either one of those things. But last year, when I was coming back from Alaska, right as the world was shutting down, and actually had trouble getting back to my home because everything was shutting down, as I was trying to travel, I went to work on this, and I went to work on this at a feverish rate that was not good and not sustainable, I should say. And I was lucky to have a couple of friends say to me, we're gonna take you outside for a walk. Basically, like I was their new pet. We're gonna walk you daily, to make sure that you mandate a break in your schedule. And I'm lucky that they walked me for enough months that it became a bit of a habit. And I during the winter months, I kind of fell back out of the habit, or started doing it more inside on a treadmill. And I think the outside part of it was important. It's stunning to think that you could sit in the same chair in the same office and not leave your house for 5 or 6 days in a row. I mean, when has that ever happened before? And so I really think that that's super important. And I do want to say, I am by no means a mental health expert. That is not my area of expertise. So I'm only sharing the things that I have worked for me, and the things I've picked up on from experts who I've listened to. But I don't want to overstate that I know what I'm talking about.
I got it. I do love the idea of walking your friends.
Yeah.
Be a friend walker.
Yep.
I really, really like that. Yeah, I have some people, and that's the first thing they ask me when they get me on the Zoom or the phone. Have you walked today? So, yeah, and too frequently I have to say no. And I know that you're not a neurologist and a neuroscientist also. On the day that I had 8 Zoom calls in one day, at the end, I got a glass of bourbon and went to my wife and said, not another day. We just, I mean, it does something to your brain, doesn't it?
It does. It does indeed. Yeah, I think I haven't gone back and looked to see what my longest day is, but I know a couple of weeks ago I had 3 days in a row where I had a minimum of 14 Zoom calls, and one of the days I know I had 16, and it's exhausting, and it is harder to connect through Zoom than it is in person. I'm an extreme extrovert, and so it is, is where I get my energy. And I've made do with Zoom energy with people, and I've gotten pretty good at it. But 16 hours of it is a lot of Zoom time, and not the sort of thing we should be doing for our personal mental health.
Yeah. Wow. Um, you're a Zoom jock.
Yeah, these days.
I thought 8 Zooms. Oh my God, you're a
Yeah,
jock.
I'm
Okay.
not trying to put your 8 hours to shame. I'm really not.
So I know you're a scientist and a doctor, and not a philosopher. And here's 2 philosophical questions that are important questions to ask. And one is, where are we now? And the other is, where do we go from here? And wherever your mind goes, Jodie, in responding to that, I would really appreciate hearing your reflections.
Well, my mind immediately goes to the data, because that's what I do. And so where are we? We're kind of slightly worse off, but close to what we were this past summer, when we were really scared. And I'm glad we're back to that number. I am sad we're only back to that number. So I have very mixed feelings about that level of COVID-19 being out in the community. I certainly wish we were back to last March. As far as numbers, I do not wish to relive this year. So I want to be clear when I say I want to be back to last March. I struggle with how tired we all are of this. And I struggle with the fact that we've made some pretty significant strides in the last month and a half. And yet, if we get too tired, those accomplishments will go away, and they will go away so very quickly. It does not take much for this virus to catch on and be the firestorm that we saw in November, December, and January, where 5,000 people were dying a day in this country from COVID-19. We cannot get back there. We had close to 200,000 people in the hospital every single day for that. My husband and I recently discussed the fact that months and months ago, I said we were going to hit 500,000 deaths from COVID-19. And he said, there's just no way. And I think we were at like 80,000 deaths, 80,000 deaths or something like that when I said that. And I didn't pull that number out of the air. That was a number based on a model. And we've gone past it. And, so where are we? We've suffered immense loss. We have so many people who've lost their jobs. We have people who've lost their homes. The number of people who are food insecure today is substantially different than it was a year ago. We have children who've had some level of education for the last year, and a lot of it's not been what we would have hoped for them. So this has been a year of loss, and we are fooling ourselves if we don't acknowledge that and mourn all of that and then strive to change it. This has also been a year where we have really, for the first time in my lifetime, I think, or at least my adult lifetime, had a more substantial conversation about inequities in our country. Unfortunately, those inequities came from violence. They came from, tragic deaths that we watched in Atlanta. now our Asian Pacific Islander communities are suffering again. And the only way that those losses, I'm trying to think how to say this. We should honor those losses by being unwilling to let that continue. And so I do think if we look for positives in COVID-19, it's that it's given us a stage to have some national conversations about how bigoted we are, how racist we are, and for people to say, I'm not okay with that. And so hopefully people will say, I'm not okay with that. And we've got a bit of a reckoning going on in this country, and it's long past due. And so I've said consistently for the last year, well, probably the last 10 months, if COVID-19 is the reason we finally attack some of these issues and say we will not let them continue and we will fight for change, 12 months at home will have been okay. But 12 months at home for me has been okay because I live a privileged lifestyle. And so I want to acknowledge that that's a very privileged statement on my part. So I rambled.
Not at all. Not at all. You listed it in a very moving way, and I'm taking it in, and I appreciate it. Wow. Just dwelling with the inequities and coming to terms with how bigoted and racist we are, and that it's not okay, and there must be a moral reckoning. And we all do. I think that's another thing that has been going on. I think that particularly people of privilege have been taking a look at their privilege, and that they have a responsibility to unlearn a lot of things that we're taught. Where are we with our interconnectivity quotient? Have we learned anything about that, or are we still worshiping the religion of separateness?
I would hope an infectious disease model of a virus taking hold would be a great way for people to understand how connected we are, and every single thing that we do shifts something out into the world. Physics is not a class that I loved, but the physics of if you move one thing, something else responds. That is what's going on with this pandemic. We all think that we've stayed super safe in the last year, and it's remarkable to talk to people and say, I haven't seen anyone. And then you actually ask some more detailed questions, and well, I haven't seen anyone means I've gone to the grocery store 5 times this week, and I've run out to this store, and I've gone here and I've gone there. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing that, but we need to pay a little bit more attention to how we name that. That I haven't seen anyone largely means I haven't seen my friends. I haven't seen the people I wanted to go out and see. But every single person you've interacted with is a potential risk and a potential recipient of your risks. And so I hope we're starting to see how tremendously connected our society is, and how we all have a role to play in that, positive and negative. We're calling on people to use that connection in the most positive way possible. And so masking is not meant to be political. It's meant to be your connection and an outward sign of, I recognize that I am connected to the rest of you, and I care about the rest of you. And my mask is about you. It's a little bit about me, but it's mostly about you. And I think when I see people who are unwilling to mask, that is my biggest stumbling block. Do you not care about me? Do you not care about someone else? Do you have to know them to care? Or are you just okay that that's another human in front of you? I'm okay that that's another human, and I hope the rest of us are too. I really think a lot of us have gotten there. But that's the way I wish we had talked about it from the beginning. I think it would have made a bigger difference.
Yeah, yeah. When you talked about masking, I kind of began to hear that as the definition of a sacrament.
Mhm.
You know, the sacrament is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, and masking is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual recognition that you matter to me,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I'm caring for you. Well, that's a good place to end on. I do want you to know and feel that there are thousands of people who don't know you, who are grateful for you, because Bishop Wright has talked about how important you have been in advising him. And every move he's made, I've thought about you're having some kind of impact behind the scenes on that. And it's been hard work. I look at the pressures that he's on. And one other thing that he says that we often forget is that he is trying to bring us as a diocese along together.
Right.
And so we're not going to have this exception and this exception because they're in one place and not in another city and that kind of stuff. And I really do respect that as well. But thank you. Thank you so much. I've got 6 more months in this job, and I'm just going to keep calling on you. I need you in your advice and your wisdom.
Well, please do. This is a phenomenal connection for me, and I really enjoy speaking to you. I echo your praise for Bishop Wright and the incredible leadership that he has shown through this. It's been an honor to get to work with him, and to have him, really listen and respect the guidance that we've provided. It's not been easy. We've asked really hard things, but we've not done it lightly, and we've done it in a way that we mean to be protective. So the grace he has shown in all of that has been incredible.
Yeah. Have you planned your Easter celebration?
I have not.
Well, blessings on your planning and blessings on your Easter. And I hope that you know the resurrection of life in Jesus in this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you letting me come back on, and I really enjoyed my time talking with you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Same here. And thank you all for being with us. Stay tuned. We will be continuing our Sunday forums after Easter. Happy Easter to everyone.